If you ask me what I think the single most important profession is for liberty and democracy in the Western world, and also like all of the world, I would, without skipping a beat, say journalist. Which is why it's a bit of a shame to have to say that journalism hasn't been doing so great. Journalism is already an interesting profession in its mission statement, which is we're gonna have a bunch of people and they're gonna look at things that are happening and then they're gonna tell you about it. We as a society have decided that information should be free and easily available to everyone, so that not just the rich and powerful get to be well informed while the average person doesn't. Although framing journalism as a bit of an intelligence service that works for the public, I don't think is an entirely wrong way of framing it. And though it is certainly the most exciting part of journalism, the part of journalism that most people sort of think about when they think about journalism, investigative journalism is not really what constitutes most of the profession. Most of the news that you consume, from like the weather report to where there are radar traps this week, is just mundane reporting, which I would argue is almost as important. The thing about investigative journalism in a purely market-based context, especially considering how willing or rather unwilling we are to compensate journalists as consumers for the work that they do, it shouldn't exist. It's just not profitable. Look at it like this. You have, as an employer, a team of some of your best people that you have in the company. Highly trained, super intelligent experts in their field. You pay them better than pretty much the rest of all of the people who work for you, except maybe the top executive staff. You get them and lock them in a room and give them vast resources. Not just in terms of money, but also time. They will be working on a single project for months, if not years. And the thing that they are working on will probably make you a lot of enemies because it will piss off a lot of very powerful people that could be an existential threat to your company. And sure, when the work is done, you might get a few more clicks on the website because the headline is actually big and something substantial comes after it. But ultimately, investigative journalism is extremely unprofitable. And can you think of another industry where the gold standard for doing that job is unprofitable? Now consider the fact that more and more media is being integrated into these vast corporate structures that are controlled by shareholders. They're very profit oriented. They want to see return on investment. You might probably be seeing like the beginnings of the outlines of a problem here. The people on the ground in the actual newsrooms, they tend to be people who do actually care about doing journalism right, even like the more executive personnel, like the editors, and they will try and protect the more unprofitable parts of journalism from the trimming knife because they are the gold standard of journalism. I mean, there are newspapers, usually local ones, that you just get delivered for free, and they do actual journalism, even if it is on a small scale. They're usually financed completely by some meager ads, maybe like a handful of donations, maybe a little money from like a let's keep the journalism healthy funds that a government may or may not provide. But ultimately, they can't be very profitable. And journalism shouldn't be profitable. It should not be something that is profit-oriented, because when you hunt after profit, money controls what you do. When you introduce money into a system, you create conflicts of interest that are usually skewed in favor of the rich and powerful, which basically destroys the most essential part of why we have journalism and why we need it to have a functioning and liberal society. But, you know, obviously running a journalistic operation will cost you a lot of money, from just the straight up, just the material to have paper that you can write on, to also just paying these highly qualified and intelligent people. And no, they shouldn't just work for free because they believe in something. We also pay people who work at charities That is how you get qualified personnel. This results in paradoxical organizations that are controlled by business interests, have a non-business mission statement, are supposed to make profit, sometimes might take donations, have to report on their own mistakes or the mistakes of the people that hold significant financial stakes in them, sometimes have to get themselves delivered and basically their product given away for free or just extremely cheap, and also have to engage in highly unprofitable practices pretty much all of the time. But in the age of the internet and in the age of such organizations becoming highly corporatized, really the ones that have the highest journalistic standards find it ever increasingly difficult to survive. There's more information available than ever, the news has a farther reach than it's ever had, and there's a lot more potential consumers for that kind of information, so it all needs to be compiled and packaged in a way that people will want to consume. And this is where you get news writers. The paradigm of the 21st century is content, content, content. The line between news sites and entertainment platforms is becoming increasingly blurred. Everybody wants and needs those ad sales and all those clicks. To optimize your profit margins, you want people who can generate the largest amount of clickable content in the least amount of time. This is obviously true for BuzzFeed clickbait lists and personality tests, but like the news in and of itself has to become more and more sensationalized in the way that it is presented in order to be able to compete with that vapid bullshit for your attention. Headlines are utterly sensationalized to, I would say, an unprecedented degree, which is not to say that they didn't used to be sensationalized at all. But now you also have all of these stories that can get past a very mild editorial process, which present a very distorted view of reality. Because, you know, editors cost money. The people who generate this content are not really journalists. They don't do very much research, they don't fact check a lot, and they don't cultivate a network of sources. They're not journalists, they're news writers. Because what they do is much cheaper than the things that journalists are supposed to do. The problem is that most of the time the people who work as news writers are trained to be journalists. They are fully qualified to do journalism if given the chance. And I would argue that probably the vast majority of them would rather be journalists than just news writers. But an ever-increasingly profit-oriented industry is trapping them in the role of news writer. A very important balance needs to be struck between professional integrity and political color. Why do you think Alex Jones, a man with such extremely fringe views that ultimately very, very few people actually agree with him, is so massively successful still today, after he's been deplatformed from pretty much everywhere on the internet? He's very far into one corner of the political spectrum. That's the reason. This is my hypothesis, okay? If you are some kind of political pundit, news person, whatever, the farther you go into a certain ideology that has followers, the more loyal your followers will become, and the more willing to throw money at you your followers will become. I've recently become immensely lucky with this amazing community that it turns out I had all along. But I will say this, I think that if I had run with a certain ideology from the beginning, if I hadn't attempted to take on the strongest points of the positions that I oppose, and if I had been a bit more sparse with like criticisms of the positions that I support, I probably would have reached the point where I am now much earlier. So there's a very strong profit incentive if you want to make money to sort of throw journalistic standards out the window and become part of a political narrative that serves a certain clientele, a certain core readership that will be loyal to you, instead of like flaky people who want facts and weird shit like that. And I would also argue that people who are trained to be journalists may be like more susceptible to that kind of thing than most. You don't become a journalist because you want to make big money. There's like a handful of huge TV personalities that are ultra quadrillionaires or something to that effect. But those are very much like the tip of the snowflake of the iceberg that is journalism. Most journalists become journalists because they want to do good in the world, which I think just really like a good attitude to have for pretty much everyone. And don't get me wrong, doing proper high standards journalism does make the world a better place. But now imagine that all of these people who were technically trained to be journalists but now actually are stuck working at news writers instead of being actual journalists. They still want to make the world a better place. And this is where the problems begin. These people who still want to do good in the world now work within a corporate framework that does not encourage the high journalistic standards by which this might actually be achieved, because high journalistic standards are expensive and very bad for the bottom line. People who own these kinds of organizations understand that the people who work for them want to make the world a better place, and they also understand that having those people buy into a certain political narrative will ultimately create a more spend-happy and loyal following, which is very good for the bottom line. And so there is a very strong incentive to create a culture of journalism that is not actually good journalism, but conflates the act of doing journalism with political activism. This is how you get big authoritative news sources just doing bullshit stories or distorting the narrative in a way that is just completely incongruent with reality. And you can clearly see where the political motivations for stuff like this comes from. This is of course not to say that A, these organizations and organizations like them used to do journalism in the way it is supposed to be done, and it is also not to say that B, none of the organizations that do this kind of thing today do journalism in the way that it is supposed to be done. There's still plenty of good journalism, and there's always been plenty of bad journalism. In between sensationalized headlines and just bullshit hit pieces, you will find good, honest and diligent reporting. But it cannot be denied that news organizations have an extremely strong incentive to be politically colored. And yeah, one of the reasons for this is probably like the smoke-filled back rooms of the rich newspaper owners and whatnot. And like outside of big like TV news media, CNN, Fox News, that kind of stuff, I don't think they actually have as much power over the culture that goes on underneath them as we might think. There also isn't like a grand conspiracy of journalists to sort of bury the truth and construct false narratives to change society in some way. But like any profession, journalism has a certain culture. There are certain things which are encouraged, certain norms, certain taboos in the professional culture of journalism that translate through all of the profession. And no matter how objectively unbiased journalists seek to be, they still have biases, and those shine through. It's really not as easy as saying journalism bad or journalism good, though I would argue journalism good. There's a lot of people working in that field, and there's a lot of people working in that field with the absolute best of intentions. And there's a lot more hacks, but the thing is, I don't think most of them want to be hacks. And when push comes to shove, it seems that journalism actually understands that it's not always a good idea to just completely parrot a political narrative all of the time. Take, for instance, Julian Assange. Most of the news media has been working really hard to paint Julian Assange as basically being worse than Hitler, because they have bought into an absurd conspiracy theory for which there is, to this day, zero evidence. But now that the Trump administration is actually bringing charges against Julian Assange, which the Obama administration always said, let's not do that, that is a super dangerous thing to do, like for the future of this country. Even Rachel Maddow, like Julian Assange's mortal nemesis, is going, hey, hold on for a second, hold the phone right there. What the fuck? No, you can't try to get an indictment on this guy for doing journalism, because that would destroy freedom of the press. Because here's the thing, no matter how much you love Assange and hate the press, or how much you hate the press and love Assange, Assange is the press. Assange is a journalist, and WikiLeaks is a journalistic publisher. These things are really complicated and always really like interwoven and granular and nuanced. And it's sometimes very difficult to get things straight. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this video to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Things have been very, turbulent this weekend, so that's why this video is late. I'm trying to sort of take it slow. I need to, recover from, one of the worst days and also one of the best days that I ever had, and it's all very, weird still. I haven't realized that I've sort of made it. Thanks a million to all the people who have come through and helped me out on Patreon, on PayPal, on Subscribestar, and also the people who just sent me, encouraging messages and said, "Yay, you go, girl." So in that spirit, I appreciate all of you, now more than ever. I don't know, have nuance in journalism, something relating to this video. I'm already caught up again in the whole, holy shit, this community came together to just change my life pretty much completely. And see you around, cunts.